Sure. So, hi everyone, and great to be here. I actually wasn't studying anything technical. I was in college and I was studying history mainly. I was taking some other courses, but none of them were, it wasn't computer science related or anything. But this was back a while ago now, to date myself. It was the 90s. And so the internet was really just becoming this thing. And I became interested in basically early web design because I always liked creating. And this was a new way to create and have fun with colors and have fun with information. And one of my dogs is trying to beat down the door if you hear ruckus in the background. Um, and and it was really that interest, and I was just teaching myself everything because there weren't classes back then. You could find some stuff on websites. You could pick up like the HTML for Dummies book or something like that, and you could just teach yourself. And so I was doing all of that and working on internships and projects at school, and just thought, I really like doing this. Let's see if I can, with this, world of all these internet companies starting, let's see if I can turn this into jobs. And so that's really what got me interested. And it was really creativity to begin with, this like new way of creating and conveying information and visual design.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And this just goes to prove that it's not always necessary that, what you have, your, say, undergraduate degree and what you're studying is something that you will end up, getting into later. So there are still a lot of options open for you even after you study a particular subject.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, Callie, can you come open the door for the dog? Thanks.
All right. So my next question for you is, how did your journey with Google begin?
My journey to Google. So my first job out of college was being a webmaster, kind of an old-fashioned term for running a website. And after I'd done that for about a year, I moved out to the Bay Area and I joined a startup. That startup lasted about a year and a half. And in that startup, I moved from being like focused purely on web stuff to actually working more in operations, like account management and training. And it was right after September 11th, 2001, when the Twin Towers were hit. Right after that, I was laid off. And it was a downturn it was the dot-com bust. It was a downturn in where you could find jobs. And my mom told me I couldn't travel because there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going to happen post 9/11. And so I was like, okay, I'll look for a job. I mean, we'll see. And I applied to a job that was called AdWords coordinator. I looked at Google because someone from the sales team had come to Google had come to my previous company. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, they hire business people. Like I don't have to have a software engineering degree. Right. And the whole family is true. Sorry, my best room to do this is also the room that everybody walks through. So you might see family at any point. And anyway, long story short was it put the idea in my head to apply. I found a job that was basically almost really entry-level customer support, but it leveraged what I'd been doing in account management and training. And, the fact that I actually knew and would be able to understand customers and their web design because of that background. And so I applied and lucked out. They pulled out my resume and that's what happened. Got the job.
That's nice. That's amazing. All right. My third question to you is, how was your experience at Google as a woman leader? Google appears to be woke. And so did you face any kind of discrimination or hardships just because you're a woman as you worked your way up? Because you've been at Google for a really long time. So how's your journey been and how has it been?
Yeah, no, it's funny that you use that term woke. Yeah, I think we were woke before we knew what woke was. Tech in general has been over the last sort of 20 years, really trying to be this kind of like fair, progressive environment. And I think what's interesting is how, like, even with that best effort in mind, you can kind of get things wrong. And initially coming into tech, I actually felt like it was pretty fair. And I think it was a couple reasons. Number one was that Google really believed in a meritocracy, very like this pure idea that it was your work that you were judged on. And I was a hard worker and I got things done. And in those early years, I was rewarded for it. So I really didn't feel these different, it was very much like school, right? Like in school, you can succeed by knowing how it works and getting the work done and focusing and putting your heads down and get it done. And that was very successful early in my career, and the meritocracy was there, and I felt like it was super, super fair. And I think the other reason was that in those early years in customer service and operations, I wasn't in a team that was so unbalanced. A lot of times you'll find in companies, the sales teams, the operations, the HR teams, the finance teams, anywhere basically where there hasn't have been the hard requirement for a technical degree, there tends to be a more equal balance of women and men. Broadly, as you get up to the leadership levels, which I'll start to pivot the conversation, that's where you start to see like, oh, wait a second, like where we were almost, at some point we were over 50% at the junior levels. What happened as we got to the senior levels? Why has it flipped? And I think that's what we've started to learn in tech over time, is that over time, we didn't realize that there were these other things at play, that we would have unconscious biases, that we would think certain people sound or look like leaders more than other people, or that even how we would look at the work would be through a lens of some of the ways society has coded us. And that has been, I think, the second wave of realizing where a meritocracy is flawed, where we have to educate ourselves on these things. And I do feel like as a person that, came in with a bachelor's degree, and so like no advanced degree in the US, and was a hard worker, but not really a person that knew how to market myself, and was non-technical, also wasn't on some of the technical teams. There were places where I felt like I had to prove myself. I wouldn't call it discrimination, but there were definitely places where I felt like, oh, it's harder for me because of some of these unconscious biases or these assumptions. And everyone's learning around me at the same time that I'm learning that those exist. And I had imposter syndrome that I had to tackle. And so there were all of these things that we were sort of figuring out over time. And even just in the past year in the US, we've been talking a lot about systemic racism or systemic places where the system isn't fair, and how that leads into everything. So it's definitely still a work in progress. And for as many steps as we take forward, we're still taking some steps backward. But all in all, I felt like it's a place where you could really succeed. And if you couldn't in an individual team or company, you could move on and find a better opportunity.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. The fourth question that I have for you is, what's been the most difficult part of your career and what have you learned from it?
What's been the most difficult part of my career? Is that what you said? Yeah. There were a lot of difficult parts of my career. Just different moments, right? Like even going from being an individual contributor to a manager and figuring out what that meant. Returning from maternity leave for the first time and figuring out how to be a mom, how to do two jobs, how to be a mom and be a great worker, which I'd always, great worker, great manager, great leader. But I think probably one of the hardest times to date would be when I was working on a major project at Google, a major product, and we'd grown quite large. And then leadership decided to really downsize the team working on it. And I didn't really have any power over the decision, but I had to follow through and somehow lead the team through this really hard change.
Right.
And it went on for a while. So it wasn't like, oh, you just get to like rip it off in 2 months and get to the other side. All in all, it took like a year and a half to get through the full process of it. And there were different parts of it, from sort of like layoffs through to supporting people looking for new jobs and helping them find new jobs, to finding myself a job. And, you know, sort of 3/4 of the way through it, I started to have health issues because just the stress, even if you'd asked me at that time period, I don't think I would have even said, I would said I was stressed, but I don't think I would have thought it was the worst stress I'd ever been under. But I think because it went so long and so many people were impacted, and I was coaching so many of those people and taking on so much of that, I think that it really, my body knew it was some of the worst stress I'd ever been under. And so I think that was really hard in terms of figuring out, well, what do I do about this? How do I take care of myself while taking care of other people? And at the same time, I was going through a career pivot, right? Like I was going to go find a new job too. And what did I want to do? So it was giving myself some space to figure that out. And I think through it all, I think my major takeaway was seeing people, all of these people, it was hundreds of people impacted, go through their own change curve, like their own emotions, their own highs, their own lows, their own kind of way of working through it, and how it took different time for different people, and how important it was to be a people-focused leader and be there to support them. I'd always thought that I was, but it wasn't until I really had to make like a whole year about this that I think that I learned some things about what it means to really listen, what it means to meet someone where they are and coach them through what they're thinking in their head. And so while I wouldn't recommend it to people, you know, try to avoid a products team getting downsized. You do learn a lot from those hard times or when the bad things happen in a business. And sometimes you learn more than if everything had been great.
Absolutely. And I think every experience shapes us in some way. So I agree with the fact that there's always some learning associated, even if it's been really, really bad. Yeah. My next question to you is, can you throw some light on your book, Adventures of Women in Tech, how we got here and why we stayed?
Yeah, the name was so important to me, obviously. Like, you know, people buy or don't buy a book based on the name and the cover a ton. And I'd originally, when I first started writing the book, and I talk about this in the book, had been playing around with a title that was more like Surviving or Thriving Women's Stories of Building Careers in Tech or something like that. And I originally thought about that title because I was seeing a lot of articles that sort of questioned women being in tech, staying in tech. And in the meanwhile, I was having a meaningful career in tech. A lot of the women I knew were having meaningful careers in tech. And it didn't necessarily look like we were all on the verge of quitting. So I was a little bit confused about this, like, where are we on the spectrum? And I also knew, having been a woman in tech, that there were hard times and there were tough times. And certainly sometimes you're going to feel like you're just surviving. Sometimes you're going to feel better, you know, and it's going to go back and forth. So I was curious about this question, and I really wanted to make sure that women's stories got represented in the title, because that was really what I wanted, a diversity of stories when I wrote this book. But as I was talking with people about the title, they would either really love it or really hate it. It was a very polarizing title. And so I think that was because some people just found it really trite. Some people found it, like, I don't know, just like not gripping enough. I don't know what it was. And as I reflected really after writing the book and playing around with the title, I think that it really come down to me thinking about this, our careers as adventures. and that they're, you know, it's a meaningful thing, but it's not without risk. And it's got its highs and it's got its lows, and we need support throughout it. And often we can't do it alone. And so I think it kind of came together after I wrote the book. I didn't go in knowing exactly that that's what I wanted, but it ended up being a very positive title, which was the other thing that I wanted. I think in the end, after I'd interviewed women and saw how positive the story can be and is, and that it isn't wholly negative, I think that I really wanted to convey that right from the start. And an adventure sounds fun. An adventure sounds like there'll be a ton of delight in it, and people want to go on adventures. And so I think that was part of it. And how we got here, how we stay, I played around with. But I really wanted to show, just like we were talking about earlier, people can come from different paths, and that a lot of us are staying in how we do it.
Absolutely. And you know, when you add a word like adventure, then it makes more people want to read it, like you said. So, you know, someone who's even young and plans, a girl who's young and plans to get into tech, she can also read the book to gain some exposure and insight on as to how careers in tech are built. So yeah, and now coming to the next question, which is quite along the lines of what we were talking about. What inspired you to write this book?
Oh yeah. I was annoyed. I was annoyed by a couple things. First of all, part of what really central to what we were just talking about was that I really wasn't seeing out there, especially when you look at books, inclusive stories of who's in tech, who got to tech, the type of job roles in tech, everything from races to backgrounds to education, you know, you name it. I was seeing things, but often you had to go to the right conference or you had to be on the right Facebook group. And when you looked at books, it tended to be women at the tippy top or very career focused, like how do you get a job? How do you get in the door type stuff, or how do you deal with a specific issue that you're having? And I wanted just like way more stories, way more examples for women of different ways you could have a job in tech and how you could navigate it, what you could learn when you ran into issues or what the issues would be. And so I wasn't seeing it, so I decided to write a book. But the other piece was a bit more personal, which was that I was also just thinking about my own career. And, you know, I've been at Google a while. I'll hit 20 years this year. And so, you know, this was a few years ago, and I was thinking through, what do I want to do next? What haven't I gotten a chance to do that I've wanted to do? And I've really loved writing. And so this was also part of my journey where I got back into writing and I started to share articles on LinkedIn. I'd given myself that goal. And the articles were about my journey and what I'd learned from performance feedback. You can still see them. They're on LinkedIn. What I'd learned from basically on the job feedback that I got from peers and my manager over the years, and not all positive stuff. And, you know, you're a bad manager, fix it. And what I did with that feedback and what I did next. And so I think that had that personal goal, but also seeing how people responded to that writing and seeing that it did fill a gap really came together to inspire the book. And it was a passion project. Like from the moment that I had it, I was like, okay, let's go.
That's really nice. In fact, since the topic is so personal to you, right? You yourself are a woman in tech. You have enough experiences to talk about, and you know, you might also know a lot of other women in tech that might have faced similar or different experiences. Because it's about talking about women's experiences in tech. So yeah, it's amazing that you took our time to write this, because I mean, I'm sure it was an added, you know, a thing that you had to do your work, family, and then you have to write a book as well. That's really nice. Okay. So my next question to you is, with personal data theft becoming increasingly common, what are some steps we can take to maintain internet privacy?
Now, privacy is not my niche, everyone. So my advice is going to be based on the pro tools, but like, you know, not really knowing the ins and outs of all of it. I think that most of us sometimes don't even do the basics, honestly. So what are you using for your password? Are they really strong passwords? Are they different? Do you have the same one password for everything? And have you told anyone it? Like, you know, like sometimes you share the Netflix password or like whatever it is, but then what if that's your password for everything? So I think sometimes we because our memories aren't great or we use the basics, we sometimes leave ourselves to vulnerabilities. And there are people out there who spend 24/7 just writing software to access and figure out people's passwords and hammer on the systems until they get them, or get access into some commercial site, and then they get the passwords and then they try those passwords elsewhere. You can use a password manager or a password suggester. Chrome has one, but not everyone is doing a bunch of stuff on Chrome. I know sometimes you're using apps, so you might find one of those apps password more helpful. It's up to you. But I think the important thing is to make sure you feel like those are secure and share, and you do some research on that to make sure. Now, a lot of companies now have two-factor authorization of some kind, where it's not just that you put in the password. If you're logging in from a computer or a device that you never have before, they'll text you a code or they'll do something additional to verify that it's you. And I would certainly put that in for if you have a bank account or your money's secure in some place, that thing, I would certainly do it for that. But a lot of the social media companies are doing it now too, because you don't want people just putting up bad messages as you. And a lot of them now have your credit card information too, so they want it to be extra secure, or your banking information, however you're paying via things. US is big on credit cards. I know not so much there. So to me, those are the two most important things. But you do have to pay attention to what you're downloading. I feel like the apps ecosphere is somewhat more safe than what was happening on the browser. But just pay attention to what you're putting on your phone and what you're putting on your computers, or what other people are. My kids download stuff and I'm like, what are you doing? Just, you don't know when those things are, if they're not from somewhere reputable that you can like look it up and see that it was rated and you believe in those ratings, you might be taking a chance and those things might be kind of spying on you or stealing your info. So reputable places, good passwords, and two-factor authentication are my major tips.
Right.
And I guess I would say that in the end, be careful about what you put out there, obviously. Because sometimes we intentionally put stuff out there and then we're sad it's out there. So I think also be careful about that.
Absolutely. All right. My next question to you is there anything you would have done differently in your journey of becoming a tech leader?
Well, I often think that who you are and what you are is as shaped by what you did wrong as what you did right. And all in all, I'm very happy with my journey. But in the book, I do talk about something that I wish I had done earlier, which was that it took me a while because I came from a background where I didn't have a lot of money. I was kind of quiet and reserved and humble by nature. It really took me a while to learn how to ask or to market myself, like to speak up on behalf of myself. Or even sometimes I had to learn how to do this for my teams when I became a manager, because it just wasn't a habit that I'd grown. And like I was talking about earlier, in our early career, we can do very well by just doing the work focusing on the work. But then as we get more senior, I find that there's kind of a silent change that sometimes nobody tells us about, but that we're expected to start to advocate for things more, or bring up ideas, or say that we're interested in some career opportunity. And it just took me a while to like even realize, oh, other people are asking and I'm not. Like, that's how other people are getting those jobs. Like, they're asking for it. And if I ask for it, I'll get one. And so I think that I have a section in the book where I talk about a big tool being learning how to ask and getting comfortable with asking for what you want, what you need, asking for help, all of these things. And I do wish I had done that earlier, not so much because I look back and I can remember a moment where I didn't and I regret it, but because I think there's lots of things that would have been a little bit different and might have inched up how quickly I became a leader, became a director or whatnot, just moved things up. It's not that we would never get there, but could we get there 3 years earlier, a year earlier, a decade earlier, whatever it is. And so that's a lot of this kind of like knowing that I'm worthy and that I can take up space and ask for what I want. Took me a while to get there and to really embrace.
All right. Okay, my next question to you is, how do you see technology getting revolutionized despite the pandemic?
I actually think the pandemic is really interesting because I'm hopeful that it will increase focus. And I think we've been seeing this in areas that maybe hadn't been getting as much focus. So I think when a lot of people think about technology, they're thinking about like the next neat phone, the next neat watch, you know, like devices, the next gaming app, social app, whatever it is. And I always felt like that stuff didn't draw me in as much as the societal benefits of technology. And where can you really improve life for people? And so I'm actually really hopeful that innovation will spur, that the pandemic will spur a bunch of innovation, particularly for young people who this is making such a mark on them as they are thinking about their careers and going into technology, in terms of thinking about education, medicine, you know, medicine, I guess, doubles with world health, but sort of like the science of pandemics. Some of the things where we just had like basic, like what happens when there's food scarcity, when there's job scarcity. And we also in the US had, because of everything going on in our country, we also had a really interesting time really thinking about racial justice and other types of justice. And so I also hope that that's really going to get focused on, like, why are loans harder for some people to get than others? Why can't, you know, what's going on with job availability for certain people and not others? So I'm actually pretty optimistic that there will be, from this period and hopefully spurred by this period, societally beneficial technology. And I think it needed to happen. I don't want there to have been a pandemic for it to happen. But I think that I'm hopeful that if there's going to be a silver lining from the pandemic, that will be one.
Absolutely. It's given, like you said, it's given us a lot of time to think about what is going on and how it impacts us in the long-term view. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so this will be my last question to you, which means that the people that are attending the session, after which you answer this question, can ask you questions. They can put it in the chat box and I will recognize them. So my last question to you is there any final piece of advice you would like to give to budding girls and boys in STEM?
You can do it. Don't let the little voice in your head tell you you can't. Don't let anybody else in the room tell you you can't. If you walk into a room and you're the only person who looks like you, you're just the first. Someone said this in the book. you're just the first, and you have the opportunity to bring others along, and maybe you can go back to, you know, your friends and drag some of them along. But I think that it's just such a, like, now with technology companies growing and with what we wouldn't consider technology companies, but other sectors having technology divisions, because basically everybody needs some technology. There's such a wealth of opportunity. And like I said, in both technical and non-technical roles. So if you don't see yourself coding forever, or if your interests pull you somewhere else, that doesn't mean that you couldn't have a meaningful career or meaningful opportunities at technology companies or in technology roles. So I say go for it, and, you know, find support if you're ever feeling like you want to give up, right? Whether it's from this group, friends, family, other people in your work or school or whatnot, you know, just make sure that you're building that support network for yourself, because definitely there's going to be hard days. That's true anywhere. And it's really great to have that support and help you through it when that happens.
Absolutely, I agree with that. In fact, I just like to say something. So, just yesterday, a conference that I was attending got over. It's called POPL, it's Principles of Programming Languages. And I was the first high schooler that went there. I mean, I'm still in the 12th grade and I attended it. So, like you said, there was no other 12th grader there, and I was interacting with, you know, PhDs from all these Ivy League universities and really big, like they're doing work, they're doing research. And so I had two options, right? I could either just leave it, because there was a time in between. So it was a 5-day conference where, and I was just like, I might be getting too intimidated, but I was there. I still made sure I switched on my camera when I was supposed to. I spoke to the people, and some of them were so warm and so nice. So I think just keep trying and don't give up. And yeah, support groups are really important, like you said. So yeah. All
Yeah,
right.
go you. Go you. They were probably freaked out that you were so like, they were probably like, there's a genius here. Like, look, she's already ahead of us.
A lot of them said that they're envious that they did not figure out that, you know, something like Popple existed when they were in high school. But yeah, but overall it was a great experience. And, you know, I would just recommend that even if something is not for you, or, you know, like you don't see a lot of people like you over there, just go for it. It's all right. There has to be a start. Someone needs to start doing it. So yeah. Okay, we have a lot of questions. So Sarah has asked, tech companies try to make their work environment as women friendly as possible. She wanted to ask if Google had paid maternity leave for women, and how long is it? And
Yeah. So Google does have paid maternity leave, and what that looks like varies by country. So it is actually really interesting how much it varies. But for example, in the US, which I know the most, there's a sort of bare minimum that companies are supposed to do. And that is 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how you delivered your baby. But then Google adds an additional, it's actually 6 to 8 weeks. Sorry, I misspoke, 6 to 8 weeks. Google adds an additional period of time that basically totals up to about 5 to 6 months, depending how, you know, the dates and numbers work. Other countries, it can be even longer. So it does kind of depend on the laws and like worker protection in the individual countries, but Google tends to be pretty progressive on that and has worked to also match it so that your partner would, if your partner works for Google, so if your husband, or it doesn't actually even, I think it's, you know, they'll do this for adoption, they'll do this for other things as well. But anyway, they also get the time. So trying to even out, I think that's probably one of the more progressive things that have been happening, is trying to even out how much it only applies to women when men can often be primary caretakers too, and start to provide that leave time to them as well. They don't get the medical leave because they're not recovering from the pregnancy, but they can get what's called this baby bonding leave. So you'll have to look in and ask for whatever country you're actually going to work in just to find out the exact numbers. But you should find that we are a supportive environment, and likewise other tech companies. It's generally been a pretty progressive place. You might find startups don't have that kind of system worked out yet. But anything that's kind of becoming like more official company usually has.
Right. All right. Okay. Jay Wadhwa has asked, what does Google search think about being biased? Some sites give top position in search results, even if they're not what the user wants, when lower results are better. How does this affect open web and net neutrality?
Yeah, I have to say this is a super interesting question. I also should say I am not an official speaker for Google. So I actually kind of can't answer this question with anything even close to good knowledge, Jay. So I might have to get someone else to answer this one for you. I'm happy to have it sent over to me and see if I can get an official answer offline. This is stuff that we're trying to think about, honestly, this balance between quality, providing the right information, and lately misinformation, really tough place. And definitely how you balance quality with some of these concepts of, well, it's on the web, very hard stuff, cutting edge stuff. If you want to come figure it out, come on over to Google.
Yeah, and you also said at the start of the session that it's weird, but it happens that sometimes even with the best in mind, still things go wrong. So yeah, it will probably take a lot of time to figure that out and get out of that. Okay, perfect. So Zen Jacob has asked, what does your plan for the future look like? Would you consider writing another book?
Yeah, it's so funny. I never knew what I would be when I grew up, and I still don't. Like, here I am all grown up and I still don't really know. I have really enjoyed writing. I've enjoyed speaking as part of the, just getting out there more and talking about these topics, but also promoting the book. I think the next book that I put out, I have a plan for that I'm working on now. It'll be a workbook that goes along that could be a good companion to this book, that at kind of different moments in your career, you could go to think about, oh, how would I ask if I wanted to ask? Or why am I not asking? Or how would I market myself? And what do I want to market? And how would I think through those things? So I think that'll be the next thing. And I may contribute to some other people's projects. I don't yet have the idea for whatever would be another big book. And it was a ton of work. The big book was a ton of work, and I put a lot into researching it appropriately. And so I don't know when that kind of all the stars will line up again, where I do it again. And yeah, I'm still kind of figuring out things right now. I'm definitely going to hit 20 years of Google. I'm going to go hit that dinger. But yeah, I don't know quite yet. I'm still exploring.
That's nice. All right. Sarah Kadam has asked another question. She says, what are the differences in job profiles of people who studied, say, CSMBA and CSMS at Google, and which individual is likely to be in a position of leadership?
Oh, sorry, you skipped some questions. So this is what are the difference in job profiles?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I was reading a different one and then I was, okay. Okay, so what I would generally say is that CS plus either of these things are pretty good combos. CS alone, pretty good. You'll find both in positions of both tech and business leadership, depending on the person's interests. And it may be hard to predict, right? Sometimes the CS plus MS has gone over to the business side, being way more interested in that over time. I think definitely has to do with your interests for sure. And you might even like going and starting some work before you decide to get like some degrees in a row to figure out which is your thing. And I also say, like, again, technology companies are pretty big. So while CS plus MS might be better on the tech side of a company, if you were going through sales or business development or finance or some other team, CS plus MBA is really common. And then there's people that have done them all. I find those people must love school. As someone with only a BA, I am not that person. I like being on the job and doing. And I saw someone earlier had asked, does formal education not matter? What I will say is formal education, I think, matters more in some of the traditional industries, right? Like if you've got a job in manufacturing, for instance, I think they often expect in leadership that you will have an MBA. In technology, often it is not a hard requirement, but it may have helped give you the perspective or the leg up in your career or the network to propel your career into leadership. So I wouldn't completely dismiss it, but I definitely have felt like I could carve a meaningful career, and I've seen other people carve meaningful careers in tech without having to have that formal advanced degree. And in fact, I've seen people who didn't complete college have really meaningful careers. But I think that it's all about learning and where you want to go. And for instance, if you want to make a major pivot between industries, you might find that an advanced degree helps you bridge that gap and build your network, and teach you some valuable skills to make that pivot.
Right, absolutely. And I would also like to say that it's not always necessary for you to, like I already said that to do some, whatever you studied in to end up getting a job in that. And it's also not necessary that if you're with your batchmates and they're trying to do something, you also have to end up doing the same thing. Interest is what matters the most.
One thing I'll add to that as well is that I've had people reach out and they're sort of debating, should I go back to school, for instance, for a data science degree? And it's a big expense to go back to school for those years, and you might be doing it after hours, or you might leave your job to go to school. So I think it's a big decision. And there are a lot of programs out there now. There's just like such a variety now of online education that I think it's also just really worth looking into all the different types of way you might be able to learn and progress your education without necessarily feeling like you have to do that. Or if you know you can't do it, I don't think that has to mean that you can't continue to develop or grow yourself. There's just, compared to when I started in tech, it's just such a huge difference of what you can learn online, through courses or through self-teaching.
Right, absolutely. All right. This is a surprise, but Shanti, who I'm assuming is a mother, has asked, how can we implement STEM education to our kids as a mother? Please share any specific methods.
It's interesting because in the US anyway, there's like a ton now of books, apps, toys that from a very young age, you can show your baby, I think this is pushing it a little bit, but you can show your baby some black and white books that like start the principles of coding at a very young age if you want to. I think though that at a young age, giving them things that build their education, their curiosity, build their curiosity is kind of a great place to start. So in that sort of 0 to 5 age, like what are you giving them that they could build themselves, or they could tinker and explore and get curious? I think that stuff's really important. And then as they get older, you can, whether it's through apps or specific toys that kind of start to propose the building blocks, go down that road. And you could focus on whatever, you know, you can follow your kids' interests. Is science seeming to engage them more than building, right? Are they like way more into animals and dinosaurs, which is what happened with my youngest, than they are necessarily with some of the building toys. So you can follow and build on that and build the appetites. And as they get older, there are just amazing apps and computer programs now if they want to start learning or self-teaching or doing their own thing. So, but yeah, I don't know what age the kids are, but if they're still young, I would just think more about that. Like, even as you walk with them, or as you're out in the world, like, can you sort of ask the questions or have them think about things? Or especially when they go through the stage where they're asking a ton of questions, it actually gets kind of annoying. But like, how can you, as much as possible, play along with that and build that appetite for asking questions and thinking through why that might be or what the answers might be? That's all the fundamentals that later they can build on.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Someone has asked, do you have an opinion on tech in India? If yes, how would you describe our progress?
Do I have an opinion on tech in India?
Mm-hmm.
Have an opinion about tech in India? I mean, you all are getting a marvelous education. That is, I know that I've worked with from years ago when we first started to do more work in India and build Google in India, a presence in Hyderabad. We, you know, we're really pulling from your amazing schools. And so I have always been impressed by that, because that was definitely, I feel like, very much ahead of where I felt like American schools were in terms of churning out technically trained talent. And I think the one thing that I've noticed that I think is something that you may run into as you start to get into jobs, or you may have already seen, is that because of even sort of cultural, like, right, like Americans can be like aggressive and ask questions, and technology is a place where you're supposed to like challenge authority and ask, not just accept what your manager says, but like push boundaries and best idea wins and all of this type of stuff. There can be an interesting cultural conflict when we have places where the education was more sort of traditional, top down. And when you come into this environment, it's like bottoms up and scrappy. And I think it can be really hard to figure out how to navigate. And frankly, that happens in the US too. I mean, it's not just exclusive when we cross country lines. You can run into that in the US too. And I talk about it in the book, even with people who were raised in households where you could not question your parents' authority. And then to come into this environment and be like, oh, like, you know, like my boss doesn't think I'm really like a leader because I haven't challenged authority, I think can be really interesting. And so for those things, I think that's where a peer group really helps. Like, can you get a peer group that's going through it and you can all give each other some advice? Can you tap mentors, people who've maybe already gone through it, and ask them like, hey, could we meet for a half hour? I've got, this set of questions for you. Most people love that, by the way. If what people worry about if you just reach out randomly and say, can we talk, is that it's not going to be a good conversation, or you're not going to have questions. But if you reach out and say, I have 3 questions about how I can adapt to this environment, they're most likely going to say yes. Most people have time for people who have their act together. We just worry when we get like literally on LinkedIn, someone who just says hi and then nothing else. That's when we don't respond. Like, that's just weird. What am I going to say back to you, stranger? But if you write to me and say, and I've done this, I'm in India studying this, this, and this, and I have these 3 questions about my career. Can you help me? I will. So yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of a long, winding answer to that question, but I think that's what I think, and that's what I watch out for, particularly when we're hiring new team members from different cultures. You know, where do they fit into that? You know, I just assume it's a stereotype. You can have people from all over the world who challenge authority, right? But you know, where are they kind of on those spectrums, and how can I help them get comfortable to this environment?
Right, absolutely. Okay, so another question that we had, so basically we had a Google form, and in the Google form they could also answer questions. So this question is asked: so have you watched the Netflix documentary The Social Dilemma, and have you watched it?
I haven't yet. No, I haven't yet. It's one of the things because I was launching a book that I haven't gotten to yet.
Oh, okay. So my question was going to be, what are your thoughts on The Social Dilemma, and you know, how do you think? I mean, how much of it do you agree with? But since you've not watched it, I think, have you like read about it, or you know, just?
I kind of generally understand the concept on it, and there's people who like full on, you know, have looked at social media as a mark of like the downfall of society as a whole. So I think it's very you know, whenever there's something, it's interesting how much when I think about technology, I think about humans as animals. Like, here's something that we think of as super progressive and cutting edge. And what I tend to think about is how, you know, here we are coded in a certain way. And that's from hundreds, thousands of years, you know, like years and years, longer than tech's been around, to behave certain ways, and our brain works a certain way. And so how does our animal brain work when we get access to these things? And there are amazing things social has done in terms of people having access to information and feeling like they can belong in the world when they don't belong in their community, and they know that. That gives them hope and just amazing things. But we also see how we can become territorial and tribal.
Yes.
And when we are not face to face with someone, what we are willing to say to them, because there is no fear of getting physically hit or attacked, right? Like, we're very good if we're attacked by an animal. Humans, we have instinctual stuff built into us. I mean, we might die. I'm not saying we're that good, but like our body kicks in. We have adrenaline that kicks in. We have things that kick in, and it's all based around that. So it's really interesting what happens when a sightless thing on the internet attacks you, or you disagree with this sightless thing on the internet, and what happens. And then, of course, there's the components of how it makes us feel emotionally, and how increasing time on devices might separate us from things that we need, emotionally and mental health wise. So I'm very in the middle on it, I guess, what I would say. I never went to work for a social media company because it didn't compel me. I don't think it is critical. Like, and I think other things are much more critical. I work at Google because I still believe information and access to information is so critical. And especially in the last year, as we've been dealing with pandemic and a major election in the US, I've seen how important that is. But I find other things also compelling, just haven't worked for those places yet. But I think that I wonder where this all will go. And unfortunately, it's good business to appeal to some of the baser, more instinctual things about humans. So I'm not that optimistic about this space, but I also am not willing to completely write it off, I guess is what I would say.
Right. Yeah. So I think this is our last question, which is by Sarah. She's asked, how important is networking in tech to climb the career ladder?
I would say most important is the work that you're doing and that you're delivering.
Right.
In order to do the work, relationships are important, right? How you talk with people, your tone when you talk with people? Have you gotten to know them and their motivations? Are you able to then convey what you need and convey it in a way that they understand? And so there's a ton of communication, relationship, all of the skills. And I think we skipped over a question, but someone had said, what do they think makes a perfect candidate? And I do think there's a secondary component of how you work with people and how you motivate people and how you understand them and listen to them and truly deliver what they asked for and what works. And that piece, I think, can sometimes feel like networking, which can have like kind of a bad word about it. Like it can feel like a bad word or it can feel uncomfortable. But I think that it's really important in terms of having people truly get to know you, seeing what you do, understanding your value, and you doing that vice versa. Because a lot of things in tech are you having to scramble and figure out who's the person that can get X or Y done. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have a much better success rate at doing that and deliver more if you've built relationships, listened to people, and really figured out how to work with other people. And then there's a third component, I would say, which is that you are going to have to get very good about talking about yourself and saying, hey, here's what I did, here's what I delivered, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. And again, that can feel very like dirty to people. Like I should just do the work. I shouldn't have to talk about it. But the truth is, your managers are busy people and they're not going to see everything you do. And they're going to need to talk about what you did when they go into those rooms and argue for more money for you or a promotion. And so it is important. I still think the primary important thing is that you are doing the work and that the work is compelling and impactful. Right. But those second two things, relationships is a very important part of it, and knowing how to talk about yourself are definitely going to be critical components in your career journey. Absolutely.
Agreed. All right. So I think that marks the end of our session. Thank you so much for coming in and spending some time with us, spending some valuable time with us, and giving all of that advice, which is very, very helpful. And I'm sure a lot of doubts have been cleared.
Awesome. It's so great talking with you, and just keep on going. And if I didn't get a chance to answer your question, you can feel free to send it to me. Just note, I saw a lot of these were really deep into kind of Google and competitors, and I'm not the pro on that. But anything sort of career oriented or, about STEM and careers, I'm totally happy to help with. That I will be more helpful on.